Chris, what's up, brother? Glad to have you back on the Order of Man podcast.
What's going on, Ryan? It's my pleasure to be here. The things you've done with this podcast, I am so impressed with what you've been able to do, and it's just a real honor.
I appreciate it, man. I know I said back because what we did this gosh, it must have been 8 months ago or maybe even longer, and I can't remember what it seems to me like. It didn't record right or the audio didn't work. I can't remember exactly what had happened. And I know we've just been busy trying to get this happen and make it happen again. So here we are.
Yeah, the audio went real bad, and it was just a bunch of stuff over the years. But
yeah,
happy to be here now, brother.
Right on. Cool. Well, I know you've got a lot going on. You sent me some information over on some things about your life, and you've got an incredible story, and you've got some, I think, really important information that guys need to hear. But the thing I'm really interested about, in addition to all of that, is your podcast and your movement, Warrior Soul. I'd really like to start with what that means, where that comes from, and what the whole idea behind Warrior Soul actually is.
Yeah, it goes back to, I served in the U.S. Marine Corps for 6 years. And when I got out, like a lot of veterans, I was kind of trying to figure out where to go and what to do, and really found myself lost and drifted for a long time, and found myself in some very, very bad spots, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But one of the things that happened was I was able to pull myself out of those bad spots, and I was able to get myself into a position where I finally realized that I was in control of my own fate. And I was looking at what was going on in the veteran community at the time. And, we've dealt with a lot of things over the past 18 years. And I'm sure you're aware of this because you're a veteran as well. High suicide rates, high rates of veteran homelessness. And, about 5-6 years ago, looking out at what was going on in the veteran space, there was a lot of talk about awareness, a lot of talk about suicide, a lot of talk about the homeless issue, but what I wasn't seeing was a lot of solutions being brought out. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to create something that would deliver solutions. And so that was how the Warrior Soul podcast started. And to be honest with you, it took me about 2 years to create an actual podcast because I was doing other things. I was a personal trainer. I owned a gym, and then went into online training. And I didn't see podcasting as something that I could potentially do. But I decided to start it as an experiment and literally knew nothing about it. Like, didn't do any research, didn't do any of the technological research that I should have. And I just kind of started it out. And, 3 years later, I'm here. So
Yeah. Just fast forward, like nothing happened between now and then, right? It just happened immediately.
Exactly.
No, I mean, I started very much the same way when I started a podcast. Like, I did it as an experiment for my financial planning practice, and I was amazed at how well it worked and resonated and connected with people. So it's definitely a powerful medium. Did you get introduced to podcasting through Brian Rose? Because I know you worked with Brian for quite a while, and obviously he's been podcasting for a long time.
Yeah, so when I started working with Brian Rose, at first I came to him as a student. I was like one of the very first students in his business accelerator course, which was awesome. Right. I got to learn about how to do online products, how to do all that stuff. And I had met with Brian up in San Francisco, and we meshed real well. Mm-hmm. And so after I went through his business accelerator course, I'd done really well with it, and he asked me to come on board as an instructor. And so what I got from that experience was just a 3-year amazing apprenticeship in learning how to do online business, learning how to do an online media company, and just learning the ropes from what I think is one of the masters in the field right now. I mean, the way he does this stuff is absolutely awesome. And I got to meet hundreds of people from around the world, teach hundreds of people from around the world. And the idea for the podcast really started when the first time I heard Jocko, because up to that point, I was under this impression that you needed a studio and it needed to look the way that Brian Rose had everything.
Yeah,
Brian was
yeah,
telling
for
me
sure.
this
Because
stuff
he's
at
got a
first.
high-end production going on over there.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Brian was telling me, dude, you don't need this stuff. But when I heard Jocko's voice, just the way he introduces himself, the way he was doing book reviews and things like that, I was like, I got to try this. I got to do this. Maybe
Mm.
this is something I could do. And so that's when I kind of jumped into it. But one of the things I think is so important about podcasting and particularly important about shows like this one, what you've done over the past few years is that, this concept of a constitutional republic that we have here in the United States. I think people forget that it's still a new concept, right? It's been in existence for
Sure.
about
Yeah,
250 years,
couple
right?
hundred years. Yeah, right.
And if you're a student of history, you start to realize that human beings tended to not go toward self-government. They always tended to go toward tyranny, toward
Hmm.
having somebody else tell them what to do.
Right,
And I think,
tyranny or a monarchy. Right.
yeah, and for something like this to survive, people need to know how to manage themselves. They need to learn how to be free. And I think, what's so amazing about what you do and what Jocko does and what I'm trying to emulate is really teaching people how to do that, teaching people how to manage themselves, teaching people how to be free.
Yeah, I mean, it's so critical. This is an underlying theme of what we talk about is just men and their willingness and how quick they are to just pawn off responsibility, and then of course the glory, frankly, that comes with it. When we pawn that off, I think a lot of times we pawn off the responsibility for maybe our ego, probably a little safety and security, and then what we end up giving up in return for this perceived safety is some sort of misguided sense of safety, but also losing our ability to have upward mobility, right? Like our ability to succeed and thrive and try new things and be better and improve, all because we're worried about just maintaining the status quo or letting somebody else dictate our life.
Right. And it's so comfortable to have somebody else telling you what to do all the time. So comfortable to have somebody else telling you this or that. And the thing is,
Do you think, I got to interrupt though, because do you think that's comfortable? Because like I look at it and I hate it. I hate it. I don't even know, frankly, how I survived the military. You've got a military background. Like when I was working with other organizations, and these weren't organizations that I didn't like. I actually enjoyed working with the people and I enjoyed the organization. I thought the organizations were doing great things, but I just had a very difficult time with being directed and commanded and ordered around. And that was always something very difficult for me. I don't know if that's a personality thing or that's just comes with the territory of taking risk and wanting to thrive and do better than you have in the past.
well, I think in a lot of ways you're probably an outlier there. For myself, I know that as far as things go, when I was at my worst, when I was dealing with a lot of my own problems, my problems were all self-caused. Everything that ever happened to me was self-created. And one of the things I think that really held me up was that I was constantly looking for somebody to tell me what to do. I was constantly looking for somebody to say, okay, this is the way to go. And maybe it's because, like you, I grew up without a dad, and I was constantly looking for other males and other people to kind of direct me. But I found myself drifting, and there had to be this kind of come to Jesus moment for me where I was like, all right, nobody's going to come and tell you, okay, this is what you got to do now. You've got to actively go out there and search for it. And I think the thing is that it's not even necessarily trying to get somebody to come and direct all aspects of our lives, but we fall into tyranny in different ways. There's tyranny. I think there's a type of tyranny in the way the internet runs our lives these days. Constantly checking your phone, men who are addicted to pornography, people who are constantly having the need to check their social media to get that kind of self gratification from getting likes and follows.
Yeah, from strangers. Yeah.
Exactly. And then there's tyranny over our appetites, having sugar in our lives, right? Constantly having the need to stuff something in our mouth, constantly having the need to not be hungry. Whereas throughout our time as human beings, I mean, hunger was a fact of life. And I think that in society today, what we're seeing is a lot of people are kind of tending toward or tending away from this idea of freedom and toward this idea of being comfortable, being safe, not wanting to be offended ever. And I think in a lot of ways that's making us weaker as human beings.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. It's really comfortable. It's really easy now, but I found that if you take the easy path initially, things have a way of getting harder. If you take the harder path initially, things have a way of getting easier. I mean, I know that's even on a micro level, just from down to the way you start your day. Like if you get up without hitting the snooze and you drink some water, you go for a run or you go train or you do jujitsu or you whatever your thing is, and you move the body and you put yourself under some sort of physical and mental stress, it seems to me that you tee yourself up for being able to face whatever else is going to happen throughout the day, whether it's dealing with an irate customer or a client or losing a client or getting an argument with your wife or having to do some disciplinary action with your children. Like all of that stuff becomes easier because easy is relative to the way you set up the rest of your life.
That is so true. So true. I mean, in a couple of hours, I'm going to put on a pair of pajama looking outfit, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to roll around with a bunch of sweaty men. I'm going to get my face all mashed up in the process. And that's because I need that in my life. I need something difficult there in my life. I need to face that confrontation. And, that's a big reason why I roll jujitsu and why I know you roll jujitsu. But when it comes to the idea of trying to incorporate something difficult in our life, one of the things that I think really, really matters here is the fact that a lot of us haven't really faced any real challenges. A lot of us haven't been put into the situation where we're truly going to be tested. And I think that if men don't face that test, if we don't face something where it's truly a challenge and truly gives us a chance to test our mettle, what happens is we become alienated from our true nature. We become alienated from ourselves. And that's where you see a lot of men falling into depression. You see a lot of men, they look for, I heard this analogy to Australian shepherds. If you don't give them enough space, if you don't give them something to do, they start digging holes and tearing up your house.
Sure.
And if men don't have something to do, if they don't have that kind of thing in their life where they're truly testing themselves, then they're going to end up digging a lot of holes. And they can dig holes in porn. They could dig holes by filling themselves up with sugar. They could dig holes by wasting time and trying to find other distractions.
So when you talk about alienating your true nature for men specifically, is that what you're referring to? Is just being active, being productive? Like what would you identify as being our true nature that you would alienate by pursuing these more destructive activities and behaviors?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to an analogy that comes from my Marine Corps roots, and that is slaying dragons. When I joined the Marine Corps, there was this really popular commercial where you had this guy came out, there was a massive dragon, he slayed the dragon, and then all of a sudden he was in his dress blues and he became a U.S. Marine. And that's the commercial.
Right. I've seen that one. I remember that one.
Yeah. That commercial is responsible for, I think, thousands of young men signing up back in the 1990s.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
And I think the what it comes down to is we need some sort of dragon to slay in our lives. Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be a violent fight. It doesn't necessarily have to be, joining the military or anything like that. But I think the process of going out there and trying to conquer something, no matter what it is, that could be a business, that could be your career, that could be trying to be the best father you're trying to the best father you can be. But whatever it is, we need something to slay. We need something to fight.
I don't think that this is like new information, right? I think a lot of people talk about this. I think we as men inherently know we have to have some sort of battle to fight. That's what John Eldredge talks about. It's deep in his heart, every man longs for a battle to fight, an adventure to live and a beauty to rescue. Like, I don't think this is new information, but why do you think so many guys struggle with finding their purpose or their mission or their battle or their dragon or however you want to term it? I think this is something a lot of guys struggle with. Do you have any clues as to why that is?
I think in a lot of ways it's because we become passive. We become very passive in what we do. And so how do we become passive, I guess is the better way to phrase that. And I'll go back, I guess, to what we do at the Warrior Soul podcast. If you look at how men end up joining the military, for a lot of men, that's actually a revolutionary act, right? When I grew up, like I said, without a dad. My mom didn't want me to join the military. My family didn't want me to join the military. Most of my friends told me I was a fool for joining the military, right? When I ended up getting out, right? And that was the only thing I'd done up to that point that was for myself, right? My mom wanted me to go to college. My mom wanted me to go to grad school. She wanted me to get these degrees. And what happened was when I ended up getting out, I came off of my own plan and I started following everybody else's, right? Going to college, right? Getting that piece of paper that says, hey, now I'm educated now I could go do a job, right? Going out, trying to find a secure career, and then following the script, settling down, trying to get the white picket fence and all that stuff. And the thing for me was that at the time, that was kind of like putting a square peg in a round hole. It wasn't where I really belonged, but I kept lying to myself and telling myself, this is what I have to do. This is how I need to live my life. And I think what happens for a lot of men is, and this is not to say that men should forgo their responsibilities, but it's to say that a lot of men give up that warrior archetype entirely because they don't find it useful anymore. They think that, okay, now my entire and complete focus needs to be on doing this job. My entire complete focus needs to be on seeing to this household. And in the process, they let themselves go.
I think that's a valid point, but it's interesting because I think you would make this connection, and I certainly do as well, is you don't need to be a literal warrior to carry over some of that warrior mentality and approach whatever your battle is, or whatever your relationship is, or whatever your hobby or thing is, like with that warrior mindset, that warrior soul, essentially.
Right. Exactly. You don't need to actually be in the military or anything like that to adopt the warrior archetype. It's something I think that's inherent in all of us, and a lot of writers have talked about that. The King Warrior Magician Lover book that's out there.
Yeah, I think I've got it on the shelf here somewhere.
Fantastic book, talks about how we go through each stage, and you carry the knowledge of each archetype with you as you go along. But the problem, I think, for a lot of us is, like I said, we kind of surrender that, and I think that in this day and age where so many people are kind of alienated from their actual human form, because we're living in a modern society. We're on the internet all the time, sitting in front of a computer all the time. I think a lot of people look at things like health and fitness and taking care of themselves as a luxury. They think it's something that they should do when they have the time. They don't look at it as an obligation.
Or wouldn't it be nice if I could go take care of myself, but I've got these other responsibilities and therefore I can't? Which is an interesting story, because essentially what you're saying is that the people who do take care of themselves don't have other responsibilities and obligations, which of course we know isn't true. In fact, I'd argue that the people who take care of themselves probably have a greater capacity and a greater workload, but they're able to shoulder it because they have the energy and the capacity to do it.
Exactly. And I hear that a million times. Oh, it must be nice to be able to work out all the time. It must be nice to have a low body fat percentage,
Right. It's like, it is nice, but it isn't something that like I was just gifted. Like I worked towards having that, right?
Exactly. And, I think the thing is, we also see in society the idea of pursuing fitness as attached to vanity. So you want 6-pack abs, or even like a 500-pound squat. That could be a source of vanity. And the thing is, it's much more simple than that. The reason why you need to pursue fitness, the reason why you need to take care of yourself is because of freedom, right? Through fitness, through taking care of yourself, you free yourself up to be able to pursue whatever you want, to be able to do what you want for as long as you want throughout your life. And I think we have this concept of, okay, when I turn 55, 60, I'm just going to sit on my couch, read the newspaper, and not do it anymore. But as I'm getting older, what I started to realize, I turned 40 last year, there is no age where you're going to go quietly off into the night, right? There is no age where you're going to be able to do that. It's going to be equally horrible not to be mobile at 75 as it would be when you're 45. And so,
I mean, people's behavior doesn't change. I mean, it's not like one day, you even take highly efficient or extreme individual who's been pursuing a career for 30 years. And I think when it comes to age 65, that all of a sudden they're going to ride off into the sunset and play golf every day for the rest of their life. These guys, quite literally, they die because they don't have that same drive, that same inspiration. They don't have that battle. They don't have the thing that they need to fight for and against. Like, people's behavior doesn't change. And it's the same thing on the other side of the spectrum. If you're out of shape and you're lazy and you're laying around and you're not working as hard as you can be, it's not like it's some unforeseen destination or point that you're all of a sudden going to start changing that mindset and get your ass off the couch and have the time to be able to pursue this. Like, you got to start changing that now, even if it's just a small little degree, and then build upon that as your capacity increases and improves.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, like, because we're living longer and longer, right? And you and I could probably both expect to live, barring nothing else happening, probably into our 80s or 90s.
Sure.
That's a reasonable expectation at this point. And as we're living longer and longer, I mean, we really need to think about what we want the quality of that life to be, because we could do so many other things. I mean, I'm sure you've got a book out right now. I'm sure you could probably get out 3, 4, 5 books over the course of a lifetime, 3 or 4 or 5 different businesses, touch the lives of so many different people, and not only that, more importantly, touch the lives of your grandkids and your great grandkids, and bring back that concept of family. I mean, I think back to my own family history right now, and like I said, I never met my dad. There's a whole story there, but I didn't really know my grandparents that well. Didn't really ever hear any stories about my great grandparents, and I think as we get older and as we get to this point where we're living longer and longer, I mean, that's going to be a really important thing, having deeper roots in your family and having that tradition extend.
Well, I mean, people don't look back on their deathbed and think, oh, I wish I would have worked more. They always think, I wish I would have spent more time with my family or my kids or my wife, or pursued this hobby or this activity. I actually don't even really like to compartmentalize my life. I used to. I used to think, okay, well, I'm an employee, or I'm an employer, I'm a business owner, and then I'm a coach over here, and then I'm a dad, and then I'm a husband. And they were all looked at distinct responsibilities and roles that I played. I don't do that anymore. Like, there is no compartmentalizing in my life. Right now, me being on this podcast, I am a father right now, right? And me, when I'm a father, I am also a business owner. Like, there's no compartmentalizing. They're all together. And that congruency I found between all the quote unquote roles that I have to fill has really created a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment that I didn't have when I was trying to do everything and they were all at odds and pulling on each other, and I just didn't have time to do all the things that I wanted to do. It's just a much more effective and efficient way to live.
And it's amazing because you have no part of your life that's alienating the other part, right?
And it shouldn't be.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. Most people are doing the opposite of what you're doing. They're compartmentalizing. They're saying, okay, things are really crazy at work right now, so I'm going to put my fitness entirely off for the next 3 months until after, April, when things start slowing down. And I see that over and over again as a trainer. Amongst clients, I see them constantly trying to make excuses, trying to say, okay, I'm going to put this off now and wait till later on.
Right.
And I hear that. I hear the money excuse a lot of times when the truth is all you need is your body. You could use a kettlebell. You can, and the time
Just
excuse.
do some burpees. Like that's all you need. Do 100 of those. I promise you're going to get stronger if you do 100 burpees a day.
100 burpees a day. Do 10 push-ups during the commercial break while you're watching TV at night. You know what I mean? Or set an alarm on your phone. Every hour, get up and do 3 sets of bodyweight squats. You get a whole workout in by the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, it's funny when people say, "Oh, I'm too busy," or "I have this thing going on," and not to discount it, because you actually might be. Like, you might have a lot of things going on, but I just don't believe that should forsake everything else that you're doing. You might need to scale back or change your schedule a little bit. Maybe you can't work out at 5 a.m. because you got to get ready and go into work, but maybe you can do that on a lunch break, or you can do it, like you said, throughout the day or when you get home. It's like, don't neglect that stuff. Just change your schedule according to your busy, chaotic, hectic life. Like, everybody's busy. You're not special by being busy. Everybody's busy.
Or going back to what we were saying earlier about following scripts and kind of doing what society expects you to do, rather than going to the expensive designer gym, get that workout in at home, right? Or realize that you don't require a gym to train, or you don't require, the perfect environment to do so, right? You could get this in wherever you want.
I think where a lot of people get hung up, though, is that they look at it and think, okay, well, I want to do this. Let's say it's physical fitness or pick up a new hobby, and they want to do it to this high level, this high degree. And because they can't, because of time constraints and other resources that aren't available, rather than saying, okay, I can't do it to that degree, I'm just going to do it to this lower degree, they just won't do it at all. So just get started and then build from there and expand and grow and evolve, and maybe time frees up down the road and you can invest a little bit more into it. But getting started is the priority.
Exactly. And the thing is, and you're so right about that, because when I first got into fitness, I was deep into bodybuilding and ended up training pro bodybuilders for a while. And because I was kind of known for this, I worked with guys like CT Fletcher. I worked with Mike Rashid. I used to own Metroflex Gym out in Long Beach. We'd get a lot of those really famous guys come in, but we'd also get guys who were just trying to get started. But I'd get people coming in and saying, "Hey, I want to be a pro bodybuilder in the next 3 years." And I'm like, okay, well, let's pull that back a little bit. Let's teach you how to squat first. Let's teach you how to deadlift. Let's just get this thing off the ground, right?
Or okay, how much time do you have? Well, I can come in 1 day a week. Excuse me. Yeah, you're never getting to where you want to be ever, let alone the next 3 years.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing that really taught me about that was jujitsu, because when I first walked into the jiu-jitsu studio, I was a lot heavier than I am now. I was deadlifting over 600 pounds, and I had this idea that I was going to be really good the first day. And then I got broken in half by a dude who was like 135 pounds, like 14 years old, and completely destroyed. And that taught me, like, dude, there's a process here. You gotta have a white belt mentality when you're doing something new. You've gotta come into this like you don't know anything, and you've gotta keep your eyes and ears open to try to absorb everything you can.
Yeah. But that's really hard for somebody who takes pride in being successful or has been successful in his life. It actually is really hard for that individual to actually go out and try something new, because that poses a threat to his perceived greatness, even if it's only perceived by himself. But you go into a jiu-jitsu gym, or you pick up a new hobby, or you get a new mentor or hire a coach. Man, a lot of people won't do that because they don't want to be a beginner. Like, they hate being a beginner and they hate looking like a loser, which I understand. But man, if you want to succeed, you got to get over that and get over yourself.
Yeah, it's the most vital thing. Especially the profession you and I are in here with podcasting. I mean, I get a lot of people who contact me saying they want to start podcasts, and I'm sure you do too. And one of the things I'm constantly having to tell them is that, this isn't you turn on the switch and then people are just going to come listen to you. I mean, this is a constant. You got to put the work in every day. You got to show up every day. You got to learn everything you can, and you can't get your head so wrapped around the numbers that you're going to stop because you don't think anybody's listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you do that,
Yeah.
you're never going to get anywhere, right?
Right. Yeah, it's that false sense of expectation about what it's going to take and how like people say that all the time. Like, oh, I want your job. It must be nice. You just dink around on social media and have conversations with cool people. It's like, there's a little more to it than that, but okay. I mean, if that's what you think it's going to take, then you're never going to pursue this. And even if you do pursue it, you're never going to achieve any level of success. You're just going to throw in the towel when you realize, oh, there's actual work involved with what we're doing here. This is why I always tell people, like, be very, very cautious of discounting other people's success, because then it just tees you up for failure.
Right. And it's not just work. I think what people don't realize is that at the beginning of something like you did, there was no guarantee that Order of Man would have become what it is right now. There was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There was no guarantee at all. You probably weren't getting pats on the back at first or anything like that.
No.
There was probably no encouragement. You probably had to generate that for yourself. And I think in this period we're existing in, where you look at schools and you look at the way things are being carried out and the language that teachers are having to use when they talk to students, I think that a lot of people are going to be ill prepared for doing things like getting into business or entrepreneurship, because that encouragement's not there at first.
Right. And even if it is, one thing I run across every so often is this notion that people want to be praised and encouraged for doing nothing. Like they show up to work on time, or they don't ever miss a day of work, and so they're praised as never missing a day of work. It's like that's like the lowest common exception standard. Like we've just set the bar so low that people expect to be praised and honored for the most trivial of activities that ordinary everyday people are doing every single day without any sort of mention or notoriety or praise that comes with it. It's just kind of the expectation that you do the bare minimum, that you show up. You don't need a reward for that. Some of these people do, it seems like. Right,
exactly. And like I said, I think it's gonna shoot them in the foot, particularly the younger generation. And the thing is, I'm not one of these people who likes to talk crap about the millennial generation or anything like that, because if we're honest, millennials have fought 2 wars, right, over the past 18 years.
But then there's losers in every generation. It's not like This is exclusive to one particular group of young people. Like, I know plenty of old people who feel just as entitled, if not more so, than the youngsters coming up.
Exactly. And one point I constantly bring up, and then I say to a lot of the people from the older generation, is that if this generation is any more screwed up than previous generations, it's our fault. It's because we didn't teach them correctly. It's because we didn't bring the knowledge that we should have.
Yeah, agreed. I want to go back. I mean, something you brought up, a half an hour ago now, is you're talking about veterans struggling. Like, what is your thought process behind the epidemic of depression and suicide in the veteran community?
Well, on a couple of different levels. Number one, what I'll say is this. I think that the epidemic of depression and suicide amongst the veteran community is also endemic to what's happening to men in general, to us as a society in general. The suicide rates are going up. Rates of depression are going up, right? And why is it so apparent in the veteran community? I think it's because when you are serving in the military, and I tell people this all the time, I was in some ways more free than I had ever been when I was serving in the Marine Corps. And that surprises people at first, but it's like, I didn't have any debt. I had a mission. I had a complete focus on that mission. I was surrounded by friends. I was surrounded by older men who cared about my success, NCOs and officers. I had a set path. And when you get out, you lose all of that. And I
Hmm.
think that all men go through this at different stages, right? Maybe you played football, maybe you had a group of friends when you were younger, maybe you were a little bit, you know, a little bit more wild when you're younger, and things start to slow down. But I think that when with the military, that process happens literally in a matter of days when you get out. From the time you get out to the time you're sitting there alone and in some cases you're sitting alone for the first time in years,
Right.
um, happens in just a few days. And so what I see out there is a lot of guys getting out with no real plan, no idea for what the next mission is going to be, and then no idea, more importantly, how to bring the same kind of meaning and purpose into their lives again. So what I, the base problem I see is that a lot of these guys lack vision for where they're going to go and what they're going to do. The other part of this is, I
Before you
think,
get into that, actually, Chris, I want to say one thing on that because I think this is a real problem, not just for veterans, but civilians as well, is not having, like you said, not having the vision for what it is they want to do. They just, at best, people are just going through the motions, and then they get a year down the road or 5 or 10 years down the road and they're looking back and they wonder why they don't have any satisfaction, fulfillment, success in their life. It's like, whose life were you living? Were you even living life? I mean, you were checking off the boxes, but there's not much life in checking out boxes. Life is found in that adventure, purpose, vision, those sorts of things. So it is very, very important. And think that it's something that too many people just overlook. Like, I don't have time to think about what I want. Like, I got too much work. I got to do this. Well, at some point, you're going to have to back yourself out of it and figure out if what you're doing is actually what you want to be doing.
that is so true. And it goes back to what I was saying before, how we tend to follow these societal scripts. Guys will get out, and then they go into this life, and they just kind of go through the motions, and then they wake up and they're like, well, this isn't the life I wanted. This isn't the life I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to live. And again, it comes down to alienating themselves from their nature, alienating themselves from the identity that they've built up over the last few years. Um, and I think beyond that, there's also a problem where, as a young man in the military, you get more responsibility than other young men, right? You know, a 19-year-old Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps is oftentimes in charge of a lot of equipment, millions of dollars of equipment. Sometimes they're in charge of human beings, being team leaders, and you know, when you become a corporal, you become a team leader. When you become a sergeant, you become a squad leader. And we're talking about people who are 22 years old, right?
Right. Young, really young.
Exactly. And then you get out and you expect to step into an organization and to be given the same kind of trust and the same kind of credibility that you had with that rank. Um, and so I think one problem for a lot of guys is that they don't want to go back to zero. They don't see themselves as being able to go back to zero. They see themselves as, okay, this civilian here needs to recognize who I am, what I've been through, and they need to see that I'm a leader. And one of the things I'm constantly trying to explain to guys is, well, you've got to show that. You've got
Right.
to do
You got
that
to
through action.
demonstrate that.
Exactly. Exactly. And if you're not demonstrating it, that civilian doesn't know. They don't know you from Adam,
Yeah.
right?
How would they know? I just
Exactly.
think there's a lot of entitlement. Speaking of that, inside of the military community, like I'm entitled, I'm owed, like because I'm a veteran, like I have to have a job, and you have to do this for me, and you have to do that. It's like, man, like you have this mentality and this skill set and this ability to like go out and take what you want, and you're waiting for other people to bring it to you, to give it to you. Like where does that come from? I mean, that's a real question. That's not rhetorical. Where does that entitlement come from?
Well, it goes back to, when you talk about entitlement, there's another word there, and it's the V word, victim. A
Mm,
lot of guys have been conditioned to see themselves as victims. And I think that a lot of the language centered around what happens with veterans in this country is centered around trying to mobilize them into a victim class. And that idea has made me pretty unpopular with some people. One of the things I've talked about consistently is that, if you think that anybody owes you anything as a veteran, you're wrong, right? You're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, veterans signed up to participate. Like, that was your choice. Nobody coerced you or manipulated you or forced you. That was your choice. Now, there's some benefits that have been agreed upon, that have been promised to our veteran community. And I think we as citizens and the government ought to uphold our promises. But outside of that, like, go take what you want. Go earn what is yours. That's on you, nobody else.
Well, and it goes beyond that too, because you actually have to apply to get into the military, right? You have to take a test, the ASVAB,
right,
to
right.
show your worth so that you can get in. And it's not just there's this idea out there that somehow people in the military are less capable or not smart enough to go get into college, and that's complete trash. And it plays into this idea of the poor dumb veteran who gets out and doesn't have any opportunities in front of him, and it's just not true. There's a lot of veterans out there though that I think play up this stereotype, and one of the big reasons why I started this podcast, years ago, was I was seeing this whole thing about I'm a dysfunctional veteran. I don't talk to me. Don't get in my face. Don't do anything to me. Leave me alone.
Don't shoot fireworks outside of my house, like that kind of thing.
And I'm like, come on, man. Come on. Like, you're not that fragile. You are not that fragile. Human beings in general are not that fragile. And you definitely are not that fragile, because you've demonstrated over the last 4 or 5 years that you were capable of some amazing things. Taking you out of that environment, putting you in the civilian world doesn't change that.
Mm. So why then do veterans seem to have a hard time? And I don't think this is like the overwhelming majority. I don't even think it's the majority. I think it's maybe the minority, but it's still a sizable group of veterans who have a difficult time transitioning that skill set over into civilian life.
Right. And again, I think it goes back to that idea of they think that when they get into that civilian job, somebody needs to automatically recognize that. And I think a lot of veterans have to go back into the civilian world with a white belt mentality, treating themselves as beginners, treating themselves in a way that they're going to do everything they can to learn. And honestly, a lot of veterans do this, right? I've met so many veterans who've come into their civilian jobs. They just want to learn. They want to do everything they can to get ahead. They want to impress their bosses and everything like that. But I think, like anything, there was a vocal minority for a while who were going through their own issues and kind of putting things out there like that. This whole dysfunctional veteran thing.
Well, I also think there's a group of people who pander to victims, whether we're talking about these guys in the veteran community or, some other subset of people who believe that they're victimized, is that there's another group of individuals who will pander to that and will appease them and buy into their story and make them feel comfortable with that narrative and support that narrative. And what ends up happening is it just kind of feeds on itself. I think the best thing that we can do as friends, coaches, mentors is not to enable people to play the victim card, but to call them out on it and then support them in a constructive and positive way to throw that card away and play the rest of the hand that they were dealt, which is strong, capable, assertive, able to learn, humility, strength, and use those skill sets and traits as room for growth in their life.
Exactly.
Like, I think we think we're doing people a favor when we pander them or enable them to behave that way. You're not. You're hindering them. You're handicapping these people.
No, you're exactly right. And those people who are pandering, you got to watch out for them.
That's true, because they might have another agenda or motive for doing it.
Right. They're turning you into a pawn. They're turning you they're weaponizing you either as a political weapon or as something to benefit themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's really, really true. Yeah, you got to be aware of that stuff. So how would you suggest then that, and again, we're talking about this white belt mentality, which I actually like that concept a lot. what I think people overlook is that you don't ever start back over at a white belt, right? It would be like, I'm trying to think of an analogy here. So I did a little bit of wrestling in high school. And when I started doing jujitsu about 6 months ago, I started taking it seriously 6, 7 months ago. It was like, I didn't start, I mean, yes, I was a white belt, but there was something a little bit different for me because I had a little bit of wrestling background that helped me pick up on some things a little faster than somebody who didn't have that background. So even though people are starting over, whether that's a civilian going to a new job or a veteran transitioning out of the military, like, you're not starting from scratch. You've got experience and a background and education and traits that you've developed. Now it's just transferring them over, downloading them to this new job that you're now engaged in.
I want to take that analogy another step, though, too, because I was a wrestler in high school as well. And one of the things that I think, like, let's say you walked into jiu-jitsu that first day and you came in hard charging as a wrestler. I'm a wrestler. I'm going to show that wrestling's the best grappling art there is, right? And then
right.
Go in and you do a double leg takedown. Now, for those at home, if you do a double leg takedown on a jiu-jitsu guy, if you don't know jiu-jitsu, the first thing the jiu-jitsu guy is going to do is he's going to take your head, which is probably on the outside because you're training.
He's going to guillotine you for sure.
He's going to take your head off with a guillotine, right?
Right.
Take your head off with a guillotine, and you're going to learn. You're going to be like, oh man, that didn't work, but wrestling's still the best, right? And then on the next round, the guy goes to his back, right, and he puts you in guard, and you're like, oh, I'm a wrestler. I'm going to grab his head and everything, and you're reaching for his head. And then the guy's going to put you into an arm bar or a kimura, right? And then finally you get super frustrated and the jiu-jitsu guy sees you're completely frustrated. And then he does his own takedown on you and you go to your wrestling skills and you go to your knees and you go to turtle position, and which is natural for a wrestler. You're going to your stomach.
Of course. Yeah, and he's going to take your back.
He's going to take your back and he's going to choke you out, right? And the problem is, I think that a lot of veterans, they're coming into their civilian job saying, I'm a veteran. I'm this. I talk to people this way. This is how I address people, right? This is how I carry myself and things like that. And there's two ways of carrying yourself as a veteran. There's the professional way that we were taught to carry ourselves, and then there's the stereotypical way that a lot of guys carry themselves. Posturing, constantly trying to show that they're the best, they're the man. And if you do that, somebody's going to show you're not.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a fine line between exhibiting a level of humility and then the aggressiveness. And I think that line is just being assertive, right? Like you come in there, be confident in the skills that you have, but be open to honing and harnessing those skills based on feedback from people who've been in the type of fight that you're now in. Like, it's a new battle and you aren't, the strategies are going to be similar, but you aren't completely aware of the new battlefield. So you got to get familiar with it from other people who are already fighting that battle.
Right. It's almost like being assertively humble, right? Assertively humble,
for sure.
saying, I know what I don't know, and I'm going to do my best to learn it. Right.
Right, because the other side of it is being overly humble, which I don't even consider humble. I would consider more of weak or cowardly or pathetic, or like the nice guy syndrome. And then you just get railroaded and walked over. So there's that extreme too that you got to be careful of going towards.
Right. It's not going in and saying, hey, whatever plan you have, I'm going to go with. It's saying, hey, I want to do the best job possible. I want to be an asset to this organization. So, whatever it is that I need to learn, I'm going to learn it. I want to learn from you. I want to see how to do this the best way possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. So your background, so I know that you talked about owning that gym, but I know also that you had some experiences there where you lost ownership, I believe, of the gym and kind of have rebuilt this over the past several years to get you back on track of things. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, man. it goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about. And the reason why I do this podcast is because it's not because I'm perfect. It's not because I know more than most. It's because I've made a lot of mistakes and learned from them. And I got guillotined a whole bunch of times. And so, I was one of the co-founders of Metroflex Gym in Long Beach, which is actually a pretty famous gym. It's the gym that CT Fletcher came out of. It's the gym that Mike Rashid came out of. Frank Medrano. It's all over a lot of the bodybuilding magazines and things like that. And when we first started it, my only real experience was as a Marine. I'd worked in politics for a little bit in the U.S. government, and then I went on to graduate school. So needless to say, I wasn't rolling in startup capital when I first started it. So it was me and my buddy. He'd had most of the capital. It was this garage, and it was just a bunch of equipment in there. And when we first started, it was like 2011, I think. And CrossFit was a big concept, but the idea of a hardcore gym was just kind of starting out. The idea of including all these things. Most of the gyms in Southern California were health clubs, right?
Sure.
They had like dumbbells, cardio decks, and things like that. And so we get people coming in, and they'd be like, "What is this place? Where's the cardio deck? Where's the swimming pool? That kind of stuff." And over time, we had this whole plan. We said, okay, we're going to open our doors, and every hardcore bodybuilder in Southern California is going to want to come to Long Beach and do this. And it wasn't really like that. There were crickets for months.
Of course.
Right? And on top of that, we had overhead. A lot of overhead to start a gym. You've got to pay a whole lot of money, and every month there's money coming out. And so I was living off of $200, $300 a month. At the time. And I made a real genius decision, and I decided to get married. And she was a girl from Connecticut who had met out in California, and she was it was this idea I had in my head that said, hey, it's time to settle down, for some strange reason, following somebody else's plan. Obviously, the financial stress, the stress of me working 16 to 18 hours a day in the gym, sometimes sleeping in the gym, that caught up with the marriage. Marriage folded. I ended up having to give up my shares of the gym. Luckily, still friends with the current owner. Got to sleep in the gym sometimes, but was living pretty much out of my car because I no longer had a place to live. And was starting from scratch at that point. And then the thing I can say about it is this, when you're going through something like that, a lot of times it's really difficult to find the way out. You get tunnel vision, and you tend to make things worse through inaction because you get so overwhelmed, you don't know exactly what to do.
Right.
And so, yeah, while I was there, I was watching everybody do this filming stuff. I was watching them do YouTube, and I was like, well, why do people want to do YouTube? Why is social media? Why is everybody so obsessed with social media? I just want to train people. And finally, it was Mike Rashid. He said, listen, man, because I was friends with him, and he said, I know you're going through a lot. I'm going to give you this computer. And I still have a laptop computer sitting over there. It was an old iMac. And he said, why don't you start? You're so knowledgeable about nutrition. You're so knowledgeable about fitness. Why don't you start trying to get yourself out on YouTube? And I was like, all right, let's try this. And so I put out my first video, and really didn't go much of anywhere. But I started doing videos every day, and it was almost like therapy. And started talking about nutrition, started talking about hormones, started talking about, some of the tricks we use to help prep bodybuilders and things like that. Built up a following. It wasn't millions of people by any means, but it was enough of a following to where I started getting people contacting me about online training. Right. And so slowly but surely, I earned enough money to get myself out of that situation I was in where I was living in my car, to living in a rented room. And the room felt like a palace, man. Like
I
when you go
bet.
from that situation to like having a rented room, it's like, wow, man, I could do anything. And then I doubled down. I started creating more videos. I wrote an ebook called Getting You Shredded, and slowly but surely more money, was able to get enough money to get my own apartment, and then kept going with it. And finally I was making more money than I'd ever had in my life. And this is before I'd had any business training, before I ran into Brian Rose, before doing his business accelerator. And I said, you know what? I looked out at the world and I realized that what I was doing, helping bodybuilders, was cool. It was awesome, but there was more that I could do. And that's when I remembered, my background is being a Marine. I looked at what was going on in the veteran community. And I'd seen an Instagram post with, it was when Dakota Meyer first won his Medal of Honor. And I was just so inspired by that. And I was looking at what was going on in the veteran community, and I met a guy named Justin Fitch. And Justin Fitch was an Army officer who had first started talking about veteran suicide. And he had developed stomach cancer. And he was in the last months of his life, and kind of developed a relationship with him and the stuff he was doing. And that was where the idea for Warrior Soul kind of started. Because I knew that there were other problems. There were bigger problems than just helping people get abs and helping people to build muscle out there. In that I wanted to solve those.
It's powerful, man. Like the thing I appreciate most about what you're saying is just incorporating our entire conversation. Like what you did was basically what we shared here, like taking responsibility, taking ownership, starting with nothing and not having like this clear expectation of what it is going to be, or just getting launched. Like all of these lessons you incorporated into that, and it's worked in your life. Certainly very similar for me as well.
Right. And, there's one thing I want to say to those people at home who might be going through something like that. And there was a point where I was driving around, and I was on the beach, in Redondo Beach. I was sitting in my car, and I was looking around, and I was looking at people walking around, and it was at my worst, really lonely. And I was looking at couples, I was looking at families walking, and I saw this family walking by, and it was a mom, a dad, two little kids. I remember the kids had curly hair, really cute. And I said to myself, I want that so bad. I want that so bad. And, at first it was like, well, I was saying in my head, why can't I have that? Why can't I have that? Why can't I be the one who's doing that? And then this voice kind of came into my head, and it said, you can. You just got to do the work in order to be able to get there. And it's going to be up to you if that ever happens. And that's when I really realized that it was up to me. Everything was up to me. Every bad thing that ever happened to me happened because I made it happen. And there's nothing I could do to change that, but I could affect what was going to happen to me in the future. And now that's the biggest thing.
It's powerful, man. Well, hey, as we wind down on time, let me ask you a couple of different questions here. The first one, what does it mean to be a man?
I was thinking about this because I listened to your show.
Knew it was coming, man.
Knew it was coming, man. And so I came up with this, man. First thing is, and it's going to go back to the slaying dragons concept. You're going to go through different stages of your life. You're going to learn how to slay dragons. Somebody else is going to teach you how to slay dragons. You are going to actually go out there and slay dragons. And then you are going to teach other people how to slay dragons. And my definition of being a man is knowing when you should do each of those things, knowing how to transition between each of those things, knowing when it's time to knowing when it's time to learn, knowing when it's time to do and take action, and then knowing when it's time to teach others to take action.
That's awesome. That's it's a simple framework, but it's a very, very powerful framework. I love it. All right, brother. How do we connect with you and learn more about what you're doing?
So my main website is up at www.warriorsolagoge.com. That's AGOGE. And then my main social media channel is on Instagram at warriorsolagoge, AGOGE.
Right on, man. We'll sync it all up. I really appreciate you. Of course, your service to this country and the lessons that you've shared, not only with us here, but on your social media and our friendship as well. And I just commend you for all the work you've done, and really honored to have you on the show.
Well, dude, the honor is all mine, and I just want to acknowledge you, man. You are out there. You are fighting this battle. I consider you to be the major bulkhead that is defending masculinity in our society, and I thank you for that.
Thanks, brother. Means a lot to me.